Hello and welcome to Gefet in the Daf. I'm Yael Shimoni from Yeshivat Rishar, bringing to you together with Hadran, learning a little bit more in your Daf Yomi every week. So we're going to learn a very interesting Tosfot today because in our sugya in Daf Kaftet there's a very bothersome sentence, Kashim gerim liYisrael kasapachat, and we'll try to see how Rashi and Tosfot and also Tosfot and other sugyot help us deal with this very, very hard sentence. Also, in the first amud of Daf Kaftet, we have another issue which is important for our learning of Chalitza and Yibum in general. So let's begin because we have a lot on our plate today. I'm starting with the Mishnah in Daf Kuftet. The Mishnah talks about a situation of two brothers who are married to two sisters and says what happens if one brother is married to an older sister, which is already a bogeret, and another is married to a young sister, which means that this marriage is not a marriage d'oraita, it's marriage d'Rabbanan, it's kiddushay d'Rabbanan. And we're also discussing the issue of mi'un. Mi'un, as you remember, is a situation where we have a young child. Her father died. Her father can be mekadesh her even when she's a child. But if the father dies, then no one can do that. But her mother and her brothers, if they're worried about her future, can be mekadesh her when she's a child. But these kiddushim are special kiddushim that when she grows up and she decides that she doesn't want them, she can be mima'enet. So all of this is in the background of the Mishnah. And the Mishnah says, if the two brothers are married to one who's big and one who's small, what happens if the husband of the big one dies? Can the other brother be miyabem the wife, because the other brother is married to a young sister? So we have three deot in the Tanaim, and Rabbi Eliezer Omer, מלמדים את הקטנה שתמאן בו. רבן גמליאל אומר, אם יענה מיינה ואם לאו תמתין עד שתגדיל, ותצא על הזום משום אחות אישה. רבי יהושע אומר, אילו על אשתו, אילו על אשת אחיו, מוציא את אשתו בגט ואשת אחיו בחליצה. So we see we have three deot in the Tanaim. Most of the Tanaim, Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Yeshua think that you cannot tell this young woman to be mima'en, that you cannot do that. But Rabbi Eliezer thinks that you can teach her, melabdim et haktana shetema'en bo. And the Gemara asks about the statement of Rabbi Eliezer, which is also what has been pasking for halacha. I asked the Gemara in Daf Kuftet Amud Aleph, Umi Shari, how can you teach a girl to be mima'en? Why is that a problem? והתנא היא בר כפרה, לעולם ידבוק אדם בשלושה דברים ויתרחק משלושה דברים, ידבוק בשלושה דברים בחליצה ובהבאת שלום ובהפרת נדרים, ויתרחק משלושה דברים מן המיעון ומן הפקדונות ומן הערבונות. We see the בר כפרה thinks that you cannot teach anyone to be ממאן because you have to be מתרחק from the מיעון. Why should you be מתרחק מהמיעון? So Rashi here says that the reason that you should be מתרחק מן המיעון is because we're afraid that when this child, you're convincing her to give up this marriage and she's young, she's not making the decision clearly. And maybe when she will grow up, she'll say, why did you convince me? Why were you pressuring me to change my mind? You should wait till she grows. So how could it be that Rabbi Eliezer says you are convincing this child now to decide decisions about her marriage that she might think that they're not good later on? Says the Gemara, a simple answer. Mi'un de mitzvah shane, because there's a mitzvah here in the background of Yibum, so that's why you make the decision and you try to convince the child to give up this marriage. Okay, this is the first part. Let's continue with the Gemara. The Gemara wants to deal with what Bar Kapara said, because Bar Kapara is interesting also for Mi'un, but also for Chalitza. Let's read again with the Gemara the Braita of Bar Kapara. גופה, תנא בר כפרה, לעולם ידבוק אדם שלושה דברים, בחליצה, כאבא שאול. ותניא, אבא שאול אומר, הכונס את יבינתו לשם יון, לשם אישות, לשם דבר אחר, כאילו פוגע באהבה, וקרוב בעיניי להיות הוולד ממזר. As we saw, בר כפרה said that you should be מתרחק from מיעון, but you should be דבק in חליצה. So, בר כפרה said that we should prefer חליצה to ייבום. Why is that? Says the Gemara, בר כפרה thinks like אבא שאול. Abba Shaul has Braita that he says that he's afraid from Yibum, that he's against Yibum. Why? Because if you are doing Yibum because she's beautiful or you want her for Ishut or for any other reason, not for mitzvah, it's as if you're being over an Isur Rais. So that's what Bar Kapara thinks, and that's why he said that you should be Davek and Chalitza. When we read the Gemara here, it says this idea of Abba Shaul, the idea that Chalitza is always better than Yibum, is what everybody agrees to. But if we look at Masoret Shas and we look at a different sugya in this Masechta Yevamot, Daf Lamed Tet Amud Bet, we'll see that what says Abba Shaul is actually a big machloket. So let's go to Daf Lamed Tet. And there says the Gemara the following: בראשונה שהיו מתכוונים לשם מצווה, מצוות ייבום קודמת למצוות חליצה. ועכשיו שאין מתכוונים לשם מצווה, אמרו מצוות חליצה קודמת למצוות ייבום. In the first place, everybody wanted to do a mitzvah, so they decided that mitzvah yibum is better than chalitza. But then people stopped doing it for the mitzvah, so they said, no, chalitza is better than yibum. And then, says the Gemara, they changed their mind again, and they said, yibum is better than chalitza. אמר רבי בר חמא, אמר רבי יצחק, חזרו לומר, מצוות ייבום קודמת למצוות חליצה. That's what Rami Bar Chama says. Ask him, Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, Achshure Dara, why did you change your mind? Why, after you decided that Chalitza is better than Yibum, you're going back to the idea that Yibum is better than Chalitza? Could it be that we're better than our ancestors? We're better than the door before us? Says the Gemara, no. That's not why Rami Bar Chama said that you have to prefer Yibum to Chalitza. Why did Rami Bar Chama say that? Mikara sabri la ke'aba Shaul, v'levasov sabri la ke'rabanan. This is not a question of what people do. It's a question of what we think. There's a machloket between Abba Shaul and Rabbanan. What's the machloket? Abba Shaul אומר, הכונסת יבמתו לשם נוי ולשם מישות ולשום דבר אחר, כאילו פוגע בערווה, וקרוב אני בעיניי להיות הוולד ממזר. וחכמים אומרים, יבמה יבוא עליה מכל מקום. So we see that what we saw as something that is decided in our Gemara is actually a machloket between Abba Shaul and Chachamim. A big machloket between Abba Shaul and Chachamim. And actually, when you see this machloket here in Daf Lamed Tet, it looks as if Chachamim are better than Abba Shaul because they're Rabbim and he's Yachi. Let's look at the Tosfot there on Daf Lamed Tet. And the Tosfot is bringing a shita of Rabbeinu Tam that tells us that our Gemara that we're reading today is very important for that question, whether or not Chalitza is better than Yibum or Yibum is better than Chalitza. Amar Rabbeinu Tam, halacha ke'Abba Shaul. Even though here it looks as a machloket between Rabbanan and Abba Shaul, halacha is like Abba Shaul. Why? כסתם מתניתין דבכורות, ולא כרבי בר חמא דאמר חזרו לומר במצוות ייבום קודמת כרבנן. ועוד דבריש מחיתין הוא כי מתניתין דברקמה, כאבא שאול. ובפרק בית שמאי לקמן דף קט עמוד א', this is our דף, תעני בה כפרה, לעולם מתבק אדם בחליצה כאבא שאול. So we see here that our Gemara is one of the proofs for Rabbeinu Tam to prove that Abba Shaul halacha kemoto. What we might have thought differently when we were reading Daf Lamed Tet, our Gemara here is the one that helps us understand and decide that halacha is like Abba Shaul. So this is a classic situation that we see Gemara with different atmospheres in the same sugya, and we don't know how to be pasking halacha, but the Rishonim that are holding the entire Gemara and the entire Shas in their heads can make the decisions and show us that even though it's not written here, v'halacha ke'Abba Shaul, it is actually written in our daf, in daf kuftet. So this was the first part of our Gefet today, to notice that our sugya is important to be machrat on the question whether or not Yibum is better than Chalitza or Chalitza is better than Yibum, and halacha ke'Abba Shaul, because of what Baal Kapara says in our sugya. Let's move to the next daf, and we'll see here a very, very hard sentence. The daf continues to discuss Bar Kapara that talks about what are the things that you should keep away from. So we've already learned from the Mi'unim. Why? Dilma gadla u'mitcharat ba. Right? We said you should really be very far from Mi'un because Mi'un can cause problems. Mina pigdonot u'mina eravon. What's mina eravon? So here are the hard words here. Let's read it together. Mina eravon be'arvei shel Etzion. Says the Gemara, when Bar Kapara said litrachak mina eravon, he didn't mean to be an Arif. He meant be'arvei shel Etzion. What's בערבי של ציון? דאמר רבי יצחק, מה לכתיב רע יערוב כערב זר? רעה אחר תבוא למקבלי גרים. According to the Gemara, Bar Kapara said that you should not be mekabel gerim, that if you be mekabel gerim is to put gerim inside the arevut of Am Yisrael. That's a ra. This is very hard. Let's continue. Mekabel gerim, why? Why isn't it good to be mekabel gerim? Says the Gemara, כי רבי חלבו. דאמר רבי חלבו קשים גרים לישראל כספחת באור. So I don't know what you were feeling when you were learning this Gemara, but when I learned this Gemara, it was very, very hard for me to read these sentences. It was hard for me for many reasons. It was hard for me emotionally. It was hard for me ideologically. And it was also hard for me because I know that I've heard other Gemara and other things in the Torah that says something very, very different. So what's happening here in the Gemara? We just learned Megillat Ruth. And we know that Gerim are very, very important, just dealt with it with Shavuot. So how can I explain this Gemara to myself? So let's begin with Rashi, and Rashi will not help us, it will just make it worse, but Tosfot will help us, and we will see it very soon. So Rashi starts and says, Kashim Gerim. Why are Gerim Kashim? What's the problem with Gerim? Says Rashi, שאין בקיאים לדקדוקי מצוות ולמדים ישראל ממעשיהם. Rashi says the problem with Gerim is that Gerim don't know halacha so well. They're not being medacted in mitzvot. And instead of them learning from Am Yisrael learns from them. I don't know, this Rashi, for me, makes it worse. That's the reason why not to be mekabel Gerim. If this is true, well, today, of course, so many people are not medacted in mitzvot because they're tirokot shenishbu or chilonim. And this is why, because somebody is not medactic in mitzvot, so he ruins Am Yisrael. Very hard. Tosfot here starts with dealing with the first sentence, Ra'ah Chara, and brings the shita of Ri. And Ri does not accept the fact that Gerim are, as a whole, problematic. Let's see what Ri says. Amar Ri, דהיינו, היכא שמסיעים אותן להתגייר או שמקבלים אותם מיד. אבל אם הם מתאמצים להתגייר, יש לנו לקבלם. Says Ri, I have this Gemara. I think this Gemara is saying something very small. This Gemara says that there are some types of Gerim that it will be not good to be mekabel them. What are these types? Somebody who wants to be Midgaya, you want to be marrying a woman who's a Goya, or you're a woman who wants to marry a Goy, and you're convincing the Goy to be Midgaya to marry you. That's not good, says Ri. Also, somebody wants immediately to be Midgaya. That's also not good. But if they want on their own, they're mitamtzim Midgaya, yesh lanu lekablam. That's the first statement of Ri. Where does Ri bring this? How does he know? He has a lot of proof. Let's read this proof. שהרי מצינו שנענשו אברהם יצחק ויעקב שלא קיבלו לתמנה שבאה להתגייר והלכה והייתה פילגש לאליפז בן עשיו ונפק מן העמלק כדי לצערנו לישראל כדמיין בהגדת חלק. Says Tosfot, you will learn בעזרת השם, in דף יומי, דף סנהדרין, צדיק ט' עמוד ב' פרק חלק. And there it says that Timna, which was the Pilegesh of Esav, wanted to be a Gerah. And for some reason, Avraham Yitzchak Yaakov did not accept her. And that's why she went to be Pilegesh leElifaz. And from this relationship, Amalek came into being. So according to Sanhedrin, not accepting a ger that wants to become a ger can create Amalek. That's where Amalek is born. So this is a very, very hard Gemara. So it says, I think that Gemara is the main Gemara, and this Gemara should be really, really smaller. So it's true that some gerim are problematic, but these are some gerim that want to be mitgayer. If you won't be mekabel them, that's very, very bad. That's creating Amalek. Let's continue with the Tosfot. וגם יהושע קיבל רחב הזונה ונעמה ורות המואביה בראש פרק במדליקין שגייר וגם יהושע קיבל רחב הזונה ונעמה ורות המואביה. So another proof, says Tosfot, A, Sanhedrin, B, Yoshua was Megayer Rachav, and we have Naama Ammonit, and we have Ruth Moaviyah. So we have many, many notions and knowings that they're very big and important gerot. These are mainly women here. You see all these are forming that he's describing here, that they were good gerot. So how can you say that it's Tavora'ah? Can you say that to Yoshua? Can you say that about Ruth? Ma pitom. Another proof of Tosfot. ובראש פרק ממים מדליקים, שבת למד א', שגייר הלל אותו שאמר גררני על מנת שתסמני כהן גדול, ואותו שעל מנת שתלמדני כל התורה כולה, ואף על פי שלא היו מתאמצים להתגייר, יודע היה הלל בליל שיהיו גרים גרורים כמו שעשה לבסוף. Says the Tosfot, at first I said if somebody wants to be mitametz to be a ger, of course you have to accept him. If you don't accept him, can be Amalek. But you know something? Even if somebody is not being mitametz, if you can see in him that his future is to be a ger gamur, you should be mekabel him even if they want to become geri miyad. How do we know that? Because in Shabbos Lamed Aleph we have very, very famous stories of how Hillel accepted these gerim that said, teach me all the Torah on 1 foot, teach me all the Torah to become a Kohen Gadol. So here we see that Hillel decided to be accepting these gerim, and the Sugya says that he was right. So says Tosfot, first, I think that Gerim who are not trying hard, you shouldn't accept them. But then says the Tosfot, no, if they're trying hard, of course you have to accept them. You don't accept them, it's very bad. And even if they're not trying hard, and you can see that they'll be Gerim Gemurim, you have to be accepting them. So who are these Gerim that the Sugya is talking about? Gerim that you know who won't be Gerim Gemurim, Gerim that you see that they want to come to Am Yisrael for other reasons, and you can't, and you don't have a good feeling about them, then don't accept them. So what the Ri is doing here is taking the sugya that was very hard, making it very small, and putting it in a very, very tiny context. Sometimes Gerud is not good. Rarely Gerud is not good. And that goes to the decision of the one who's being Mekabel them. But when you want to be Mekabel Ger, you have to think also. But if it's being Mitzametz, or if you feel that they want to be Ger Gemur, of course, the Bracha, and they're very, very close part of Am Yisrael. So this is what Ri says here. But Ri did not help us to deal with Rashi. Because Rashi said that Gerim are not being Mekayim mitzvot. So maybe it helps us to understand Rashi, because now we see that these are not all kinds of Gerim. These are just specific Gerim that might be problematic. But I want to look with you at a Tosfot in another sugya that also deals with this sentence. It says very interesting things. That's the Tosfot in Kiddushin Daf Ein. Tosfot in Kiddushin Daf Ein also deals with the sentence because it's brought there also, Kashim Gerim Yisrael. And here he brings us a lot of other reasons and parshanut. What are the problems with Gerim? And from here, we'll see very interesting things, because we'll see hard things on one hand and we'll see wonderful things on the other hand. And at the end, we'll see how everything can be put together in a way that our feeling about Gerut can not be hampered or teared upon from these sugyot. And we can understand how these sugyot actually are speaking about what we understand, that Gerut is very important, and that it's a mitzvah to have Gerim, and it's a zchut to have Gerim, and Gerim are bringing Am Yisrael up and not chas v'chalila down. So let's see what the Tosfot says here. First, he brings Rashi and deals with him, but then continues the Tosfot and says there's a totally different approach. Yesh mefarshim the kashim Gerim liYisrael, not because they're problematic. לפי שהזהיר הקדוש ברוך הוא עליהם בכ"ד מקומות שלא להונות אותם ואי אפשר שלא יצערו. Says the Tosfot, when I say that something is hard, I don't mean that they're hard. Maybe what is happening is that we are now, when we've been becoming Gerim, have to stand in a very big nisayon, which is hard for us. To have a Ger, you have not to be mitzar the Ger. And once you have Gerim, there are good chances that you could be mitzar him. I think if I would be a Ger, the sugya would be mitzar me. Okay? It's hard. So that's why Kashim Gerim, because it's hard. It's hard because we need to be good. We need to be able to accept Gerim, and that could be a problem for Am Yisrael. So that's why Kashim Gerim. Very interesting parshanut here in the Tosfot. Another parish brings the Tosfot and says, Harav Rabbi Avraham Ager, parish, לפי שהגרים בקיאים במצוות ומדקדקים בהם. קשים הם לישראל כספחת. מתוך שהקדוש ברוך הוא מזכיר בבונותיהם של ישראל כשהם עושים רצונו. וקיאי גבנה מצאנו גבי הצרפתית שאמרה מה לי ולך איש האלוהים כי באת עליה להזכיר עווני, מתוך שהוא צדיק גמור היה נראה לה שמזכיר השם עוונה. So here's this fascinating situation. In the sugya, discussing why Gerim are not good for Israel, comes a Ger, Rabbi Avraham Ger, and says, I'll tell you why. Because Gerim, hafuch from Rashi, Gerim are bekim in mitzvah. When you want to become a Ger, you do every mitzvah, you're making medaktek mitzvah. And what happens is that sometimes Israel don't look so good like Gerim. And that might bring Israel in a bad light. I felt that when I was reading Ruth, and you see Ruth HaMoaviyah and her chesed, and you see the rest of Beit Lechem, and you say, wow, Am Yisrael needs to learn chesed for Ruth, because a ger is somebody with power, somebody with strength, somebody with a very, very high ma'ala ruchani. And sometimes to be next to a tzaddik person, that might make you look bad. So here in this Tosfot, we have two different approaches that saying, why are Gerim Kashim Israel? Because Israel next to Gerim don't look so great. Gerim are better. Gerim are an Edgar from Israel. At the end of the Tosfot, we see Reed and our sugya helped us understand Gerim, but here Ri says something which is very hard. So let's read Ri and try to deal with him. Ri perish. ולפיכך קשים שנטמעו בישראל בין השורה השכינה אלא על משפחה מיוחסת. Says Ri, I think there is a problem with Gerim. There is a hardship with Gerim, is that Shechina is not being sure on Gerim. This Ri is very, very hard for me. And I was bothered by that. And I looked at the Tosfot Rosh. And the Tosfot Rosh takes Ri and says that he doesn't agree with him. I want to show you the machloket between Ri and the Rosh, which I think the Rosh is very, very convincing. יש מפרשים, says the Tosfot Rosh, משום שגורמים לשכינה שמסתלקת מישראל על ידי הגרים שמעורבים בהם, ומן הקדוש ברוך הוא משרה שכינתו על המשפחות המיוחסות. That was Ri. Says Tosfot Rosh, ולא נהירה. I don't understand the Ri. דגרים ראויים שתשרה עליהם שכינה. כדאמרינן עובדיה גר אדומי היה. עובדיה the Navi was a ger adomi. How can you say that Shekhinah is not sure on gerim? How can you say that? That is not true. So how will I explain the Gemara? When it says that Kadosh Baruch Hu mashre shchinato el mishpachot hamiyuchasot, some people are asul lavo b'kahal. And if they're going over this issue, that's a problem with Shekhinah. But that has nothing to do with Gerut. That has to be with going over the issue of Lavo Bakal if you're not allowed to be Lavo Lakahal. That's what says Tosfot Rosh. So I want to sum up what we saw. We have a very hard sentence in the Sugya, Kashim Gerim Yisrael Kasapachat. We read Rashi that said the Gerim are not being medaktik mitzvot. This did not work. So first we went to the Tosfot here and we saw that Ri says, this might be true for a very, very specific kind of ger, a very rare ger. But usually you have to accept gerim. If they're mitamit, you have to accept them. You don't accept them, it will be very bad. Bringing a malik. And even if people are not mitamit, if you feel that they'll be gerim room, you have to accept them. So if you see that there's a problem for a person who don't accept them, that's true. But of course, gerim are welcome and they're wonderful. So that was Tosfot here. Then we went to Tosfot in Kiddushin and we saw that there are also other perushim for this sentence, Kashim Gerim Yisrael. For example, Kashim Gerim Yisrael, because we're not allowed to be mitzvah them, and we might be nofel in this. And also, Rabbi Avraham Hager read the sugya, learned the sugya, and said, "I'll tell you why gerim are hard, because gerim are more medaktik in mitzvah, and then Am Yisrael don't look so good next to gerim." Hafuch from Rashi. And even though we here said that gerim lo ra'ish tishra lehem shchina, said the Rosh, excuse me, Ovadia ger adomiyaya. Gerut does not refrain from having Shekhinah in a ger. You can be a Navi. Now, those of you who learn Machshavet Yisrael know that this is also connected to Machloket Rambam and Bihal. But what I wanted to show here, that in this sugya, we see this Machloket standing in a very, very strong voice of how gerim are a very important part of Am Yisrael and are the highest places in Am Yisrael. And even though we have these sugya in the statements, we will make them very small or even read them in a different light. So I hope, as you feel like me, that sometimes there's a hardship in the Gemara, and when we learn Rishonim, to open up our eyes to see things in a different perspective. B'ezrat Hashem, continue in your learning, and we'll meet again next week. Take care.